As the Institute looks at the long range goals and the short exercises to bring those long range goals into fruition, it's extremely interesting to notice the way it's worded. It says to plan and implement programs designed to enhance the academic, social, emotional development, and leadership skills of students. In actuality, the Institute is creating the plan. I don't know of any other group that is planning specifically to implement programs. And the Institute has done that. They do that with the parent work that Dr. Young has. It does that with the work that Dr. Lester Young has done in getting a focus on support systems for boys of African ancestry, which did not exist for the more than 200 years that the Board of Regents was in existence, while we were still enslaved people, mentally as well as physically. So the Institute is going to create and plan and implement programs so that the academic achievement and the spiritual, emotional, psychological health of children of African ancestry is attained. Right now, the data show that there is an increasing incidence of suicide among African Americans. There is an increased incidence of violence with people of African ancestry. And that's worrisome because when you hear that statistic, you don't hear of any plan to change it. You just hear a recitation of the pathological descriptions of suicide and of violence, the proliferation of guns as power symbols, perhaps. And I am sure in talking to some of these young people who have been involved in the violence in the street, the violence in gangs, it's an interesting discussion because they don't have a feeling that these people that I'm shooting and fighting are my brothers because they have no history, knowledge of who their brother is. So the closest person to them who steps on their sneakers becomes the object of his wrath. I have heard children fight just because he looked at me. I didn't like the way he looked at me. And if you look at the indigenous people on the continent of Africa, they say with a smile, I see you, which is a validation of your existence and your importance. So it's a difference in he's looking at me and I see you. And that's a spiritual difference. It's a difference that connects us. And you can imagine what it must have been like on that plantation with young children separated from everything that they knew and loved, and perhaps being in a setting where there were other people who looked like they looked, but they didn't speak their language. So it wasn't possible for them to communicate with them. So when you're talking about a plan, you are creating the plan. And then you are implementing it. And then you are spreading it. You are proliferating it so that people know, so that young people from the time that they start school and they go to church or they go to a community-based organization, that they see the connection between them and other people. I can remember when I was a child that whenever we traveled and we saw someone who looked like we looked, we felt safe. And I can remember going to Israel and wanting to see the Falasha, wanting to see the Ethiopian Jews, because I wanted to connect with them. I felt that there was some common ancestry, some common understanding, some common spiritedness. And so we want to plan programs where children see that beyond language, that they see and understand that we are one people. Now, my mother told me that when, in fact, in the presence of my mother, my grandmother told me about what I call communication. And she said that during the slave experience, very often the slavers hired local African men to man those slave ships. And once or twice, there were some who would go back a second time. Most of them wouldn't, because once they realized the nature of the adventure and the way that people were chained and handled, they would not participate. But then there were some who decided that they would go, but they could see what they could do. And so, again, we're talking about a difference in language. They're talking about the inability to communicate. But they knew one thing. These people didn't have a knapsack or a suitcase, but they had nothing but what was on their bodies, rags that had been worn and torn and soiled, but they had hair. And so they decided that they would give them something that would help. They didn't have any way to communicate, but they knew the value of certain fruits and vegetables, and they would slip okra seeds and yam tubers in the hair of the captives, of the fugitives, even though they couldn't say to them in their language, but they communicated it to them. I can't take you home again. I can't take away your pain and your devastation. But if you will plant these seeds in these tubers and eat the fruits from them, you will grow strong. And maybe someday you will go home again. So it is important when the Institute begins to plan that they know that they are building the plan. And they're building that plan that says we will find a way to let you know that you're important. And we will find a way to implement these programs as those people did on that slave ship, so that the enhancement of social, emotional development and connectedness and spiritual development will flourish. And leadership roles. There are many kinds of leaders. You become a leader when the cause makes you a leader. It's not something that develops out of an interest in personal aggrandizement. It's the need that creates the leadership. And the Institute has shown that need and is creating that plan. Thank you so much for your time. Okay. We're going to go on to the fourth goal, just briefly. But as we begin to think about what it is that we're trying to do, I'm reminded that very often I have the need to apologize to the children for not speaking more quickly, with more clarity, with more vigor, against the educational identification that has been rendered to them, that never recognized their genius and their ability and their potential. And I realize now that a part of it was out of fear of the competition that would develop if the skills of these people were really known. Okay. I wish I could see you, but across the miles and with all of the obstacles that are there, my spirit touches you, reaches out to you with exclamation and adoration, tells you how extraordinary you are, and how gifted and how talented, and praise to the Doctors Young for what they have done in developing this institute. We will embrace Goal 4 shortly. This one, when I ran out of time, I mean,